Hi, I hope everybody's having a good day wherever they are. Like I say, I'm not responsible if anybody gets hurt. It's just my opinion. Sometimes I swear. I'm going to do a reading on this Race to the Moon in the Americans going. So this is a take two, so I'm going to go where I left off, which was there was negative talk about going into the space program, and sometimes I swear, and I'm not responsible. There was a lot of negative talk about going into space. They said, oh, this is dangerous. Someone could get hurt or killed. So there was a lot of negative. A lot of people wanted to have option. They wanted to forgive them because they were scared that they would get hurt or killed. And they tried to be optimistic and positive about it because they weren't sure how it would turn out because, you know, Buzz Aldrin and all of those. So, yeah. And they were releasing pain because it does a lot of stuff on your psyche and on your body, training to be an astronaut. I think it does. I feel like it's a lot of stress on your body to be an astronaut because I've seen things where they have to go into water to pretend they're in water. It does a number on the psyche, and they have to go in that spinning thing, so they get a lot of pain. And they moved on. They said, okay, we're going to do this. Let's move on. And the other one was they had dark side of wealth. I don't think they had a lot of money for the space programs, and there was a lot of failure with the money and loss because, you know, they were getting in debt and lack of stability because, like I said, they didn't have a lot of money. And they would probably have to ask people, the president, John F. Kennedy and stuff like this about, and Nixon and Johnson and all the presidents about the money, you know, because it cost a lot of money to put men in space. And come and clean. They wanted to come clean and say, we're not sure if it's going to happen. This is the seven wands in reverse. They wanted to come clean. They weren't sure it was going to happen. And they were rethinking the approach of how are they going to get into space. Because this was in the late 60s. So I feel like they were keeping secrets. They weren't so enthusiastic about going into space. Like they were hiding a lot of secrets about going into space. They weren't sure if they could do it. So they were like a lot of negativity, I feel. In self-deceit. They were deceiving the people, the public, about going into space. They didn't think they could do it. So there was a lot of deceit. They weren't being honest about going into space. They were rethinking, oh, how are they going to do it without putting people in danger and getting them killed? And the Ace of Wands, they had new projects besides going to space, and maybe they were going to have animals go into space. I knew they did that in the early days. They had monkeys. They had monkeys in the beginning of that. And they were impatient and they wanted power to be able to go into space and new opportunities to growth. This is a growth card. So they wanted new ways of going into space and new ideas, like, you know, going to, like, and this is personal transformation. This is the Six of Swords in reverse. So, to change, unfinished business. There was a lot of emotional baggage with them thinking of going into space, like, because they're scared to death, you know, because of getting killed in space. They had emotional baggage. They're thinking, oh God, is this going to be too dangerous to go into space? Because they weren't sure. They could handle it if they were the emotional of being in space and physical. So I feel like that. And there was a lot of unfinished business. They didn't do enough testing. Maybe they didn't do enough testing on the ground before they went into space. So it seems like they were having trouble about going into space. Like, all right, did the astronauts did not really, you know, buzz in them? Were they scared of going into space? I'm going to ask 4 cards. Were they scared of going into space? You know, they didn't want to do it because they were scared something would happen. Were they scared of going into space? Please tell me, Buzz, when you were there, you know, talking about going into space, were you, you and Buzz and the other people, were you scared of going into space? I'm going to do 3 cards. Please tell me, were you guys scared of going into space? This is the Emperor. They were excited to do it. They wanted to be a figure, you know, to make money and be popular and be the first astronauts in space. They wanted to do this, and they were focused on the idea of doing it. But they tried to avoid conflict. This is the Wands in reverse. They tried to avoid conflict because they didn't want to rock the boat about going into space. They weren't sure they wanted to do it. So they had different ideas of going into space. They weren't so sure. They liked the way things were running. So they agreed to disagree. They didn't like how things were handled, like how that people were running the space program. The astronauts didn't like it. Behind, you know, in the interviews, you see them happy and everything, but behind closed doors, they didn't necessarily agree with the space program, how smoothly it's going. They were saying, oh, maybe we should wait a couple more years before we go into space. And this is the Pentacles. They were lack of long term. They were vision. They thought they weren't looking through the long term, because you don't know what's going to happen. They didn't think they were looking for the long term. They were thinking of the short term. Buzz Aldrin and all of them thought, you're not looking to the future, you know, of space or us landing on the moon or whatever. They thought, oh, you guys are only thinking about A and B, not C, D, and E, and F. They were distracted too. They weren't focused. The astronauts thought these people were not focused enough. So they were not happy about going into space. They were, but they had the reservations. They weren't specifically enthusiastic. They were happy, but they had questions. They weren't sure how safe it was. They didn't think it was very safe. All right, I'm gonna ask: did they actually land on the moon? You know, they said, oh, we're going to land on the moon. Did they actually do that? That's $1 million question. Did they really land on the moon? The elephant in the room. 1, 2, 3, 4. Did they really land on the moon, or was that a bunch of bull? You know, like I say, sometimes I swear. All right. It says, no, they didn't land on the moon. There were delays. Like I said, they didn't have enough money, resources. There were delays. This is in the reverse. They didn't have enough time to practice because this was in the late 60s and they didn't have the technology. I feel like they didn't have the technology and the time and the money, you know, because they were going in a space war with China and Russia and other countries. So they wanted to be the first, and they were rushing it. You know, they didn't take the long-term consequences because this was dangerous going, and there's challenges because there were challenges because people could get hurt or killed, like I keep on saying, because this is a dangerous thing to do because you could get hurt or killed in a late start. So they were late getting to become the first people in space. So they weren't. So we didn't land on the moon. They were reckless because, you know, in the past, people have been killed and hurt. Like I constantly say, people have been hurt. They hesitated because they would think it was being too risky. They said, oh, I don't know if this is realistic or this is smart enough to do this. I don't know if we're ready because this is our lives. And, you know, they were leaving their families to go into space. And, you know, they probably had to have wills and stuff and have serious talk with the loved ones saying, I might not come back. So they were holding back also saying, oh, I think this is not safe. I think this is too dangerous. We haven't spent enough time practicing and learning about space technology. I just think they did. And they were risk-taking. They were taking a risk, and they were risk-taking because they wanted to beat the Russians and China and all the other people who wanted to be in the space war. So they were being reckless. And they were blocked from, like I said, they didn't have the money, or they had some money, but they were blocked. They didn't have, the technology. They were, the hands were against the wall. There was a lot of failures. Like they said, they tested a lot of times, and the rockets would fall apart, or they would go up in space and then, go up, and then they'd fall apart. So there was a lot of failures before. It's like you practice a bunch of times and you have a lot of failures. Like the Wright brothers and a lot of things. They test things out, and you get a lot of failures before the positive and things get better. But there was a lot of one. They had immaturity goals, like thinking, oh, excuse me, I must be catching a cold or allergies. Yeah, they were thinking unrealistic goals, like, oh, we can be the first people on space. They were being unrealistic because they didn't have they kept on they were rushing into doing this. They weren't, they wanted to beat the Russians and the other countries in the space war. They weren't taking the time and being safe. I feel like they're not the safest. They weren't thinking about the astronauts. They were thinking about going to space. And this was the 6 of Wands. So there was doubt. There was failure in the practicing. Like I said, all the time there were failures where things kept on breaking down, not working out. The ships would break down. The stuff, maybe the suits would have malfunctions. There was a lot of malfunctions and problems with going into space before they went into space. So, and they had personal defection, like, oh, they felt defeated because there was so many bad things that were happening. Like they thought they were being cursed. Like, oh, this sucks. Things aren't going our way because things were becoming negative because they couldn't get into space and they being the first space people. So, yeah. So they were having a lot of problems, and the astronauts didn't like it. So they weren't the first ones in space. All right. I'm going to ask a question. Where is it, the Russians or another country that came into space first? Did the Russians and other countries come first? I'm going to do 3 cards. Did the Russians and the other countries go first into the space war because the Americans wanted, but I'm going to be fair. 3. Did the Russians or the Chinese or the other things? All right, judgment. Yeah, they were judging. The other countries were judging America because they didn't think they were doing a good job. They thought they were rushing into it. So there was a lot of judgment. And the other countries had better technology. Like they spent a lot of money on technology. China and Russia and the other countries, they had probably better people, scientists or whatever that you call them. And they forgave people easier than the Americans because they were forgiving when they made mistakes, and they had mercy on the people that had problems in the space thing. They wanted to be the first ones in space. So it says yes. The other countries, there were 2. So yes, the other countries were there first. This is the devil, shadow self, attachment, addictions. The other countries had addiction. I'll be right back. I'm going to blow my nose. Excuse me. Sorry. Sometimes that happens. I'm going to get a tissue. Yeah, it happens. Sorry about that. They had addiction of being the first ones, and
She been out. Has she been?
Yes.
Okay.
Sorry about that. Yeah, they were addicted to be the first ones in space. They wanted to be the first ones in space, China or Russia. So they wanted to be the one. They did some underhanded things, toxic things to the other countries. You know, maybe they might have done sabotage or something. So they did this destructive behavior. Maybe they had spies who went into America and other countries and did destructive things, and they tempted them with money to do destructive things. Well, that's interesting. And the lack of inner joy. So they had some inner joy, and they had lack. This is the 6 of Cups, 9 of Cups. They were lack of inner joy because I think they did it underhandedly, but they were happy about it. They had inner happiness. So I'm going to look up this restrictions and stuff, and they did destructive behavior. So yeah, I'm going to look up 2 cards on the destructive behavior. What did they do that was destructive? Did they have spies that went into the American space program, and they just, did they have spies or something like that? Or was it no? All right, they had inner turmoil because they had to sneak in and felt bad doing that, but they had a deadline. Probably the people higher up were in the space program said, "Oh, you have to beat the Americans. You have to beat the Americans," and there were secrets. So there were secrets that the Russians or Chinese are hiding about being the first ones in space and how they did it, and they were hoping, and they're reaching out to beat the Americans. They were hoping to beat the Americans and other people in space, and they were worried about being found out that they were doing things underhandedly. So they were doing things underhandedly. The other countries to be the first ones in space, and they were self-limited beliefs. They had self-limited beliefs like, I don't care if we. They also didn't care that they did underhandedly things, and they had negative thoughts of. They might have been, thinking, oh, we're going to be caught, and they're being paranoid, like, oh, we're going to be caught because we were being underhanded. We had spies in the American things, but so I think they had a lot. So it looks like they were underhanded in spies, and they wanted to have new perspective. All right, I'm gonna ask another question. Give me a minute to think. Did the president know that they didn't go into space? Let me know. I'm going to ask 4 cards. Did they know that willingly? Did he know that they did not go into space? That the Americans did not go into space? Did they know? I'll do 3 cards, please. This is entertainment purposes. So they had self-doubt. He wasn't sure what was going on, and lack of self-awareness. He wasn't so sure. He wasn't being told the 100% truth, or he didn't want to know. And destruction. He tried to ignore the calls. He didn't want to get involved with it, like when they were calling and saying, hey, we need to talk to you about the space program. He didn't want to get involved. And he said, I don't want to get involved. He didn't want, and he had to punish people for being dishonest. He didn't want anything, and he loathed the people who were lying about the space program. He loathed them. He didn't like them. He didn't want to get involved. There were limit. This is the devil in reverse. He he had beliefs that were dark, so he didn't know about it, and they were dark, and he wanted to be detached. He didn't want to know anything about it. He felt guilty, felt detached. He didn't like how it made him feel. He probably had trouble sleeping, and he felt bad that these people were lying about it. lack of will. He felt like crap that these people were lying about the space program. So, and he was trying to restore control. He wanted control and to be in the space program, so that he knew about it, but he didn't want to be involved, but he had to be. And he had anxiety about it. He was stressed out about knowing about the space program, about how it fell apart in the beginning when Aldrin and Buzz Aldrin and Neil Armstrong didn't go and land on the moon and stuff, and they weren't the first astronauts, the American astronauts, and the other astronauts from other countries were there. So he was very stressed out and upset, and he had insomnia. He had trouble sleeping. He felt tired all the time, felt guilt, and he was hopeless. Oh, God, the Russians or China or whatever, North Korea or whatever, having the money, and they have the technology, and they had trouble. And he had nightmares like, oh, God, we're going to be caught. He felt really screwed. He knew about it, and he felt screwed. I'm going to do one more card. So what did the president do about it? Did he turn the other cheek, or did he say something? I know it said that he wanted to annoy it, and he didn't want to get involved, but I'm going to go deeper. One card. He had priorities, other priorities that he wanted to do besides the space program and time management. He wanted it to work out, the space program, the American space program, and he wanted to balance the different decisions about how they're going to go forward. You know, maybe they would have better technology, better scientists, the people who run it. So, yeah, sorry if my nose is running. Sometimes you start getting a cold. It is what it is, or allergies. So, all right, I'm gonna ask. Did we actually go to Mars? That's a good question. Did we actually go to Mars, or was that a bunch of crap? Did we actually go to Mars? Is it just crap? Did we actually go to Mars yet? Or is that just fake? Did we actually go to Mars? 3 cards, please. Did we actually go to Mars? Yes, we did. But it was challenging, and with freedom, we wanted to do it. There was action. There was fast action. They wanted to be the first people to go on Mars. They were excited. They had change. They had other people getting involved. It was air traffic. They were excited. They wanted to be the first ones in Mars, so they really excited. And it was a new beginning. Like, yee-hoo, we're going to be the first ones in Mars. So they were positive. They were spontaneous. They had free spirit. They probably had wine or champagne or beer in the toasting and the space thing where the space, when the rocket goes off and they watch them, they probably were having toasters and shaking everybody's hand and giving people hugs and stuff. So they were really happy going to Mars, and they had opportunities and ideas of going into Mars. So they're really happy that it turned out well. So there was they have developments. There's going to be more developments that are going to be going on in Mars. So yeah, this is, and they're very loyal to the people who made it done. You know, they said, "Oh, you guys did a good job. We're going to pay you well. You're going to become famous. You're going to, maybe you can write a book about going to Mars and stuff." All right, what about going to the moon? Did it take a while to go to the moon? So did they finally go to the moon? Did it take a long time to go to the moon? Did they go to the moon? Because they said they did. They went to Mars, so I'd be very surprised if they didn't go to the moon. Did we go to the moon eventually? I'll do 4 cards. Did we... We had data about going to it. There was destroyed ideas. There was failures and broken. There were privacy. They didn't want people to know that they had failures in the past. I think that's it. They were immature about how it was working out, going to the space program, and there was a lot of stress going through the space program and going up in space. There was some delays about it, and they had some negative sacrifice, and they had difficult decisions about it, and they had to weigh their options, and then there were crossroads. So it says maybe we did go into space finally. I'm going to do 3 more cards. Did we eventually? It doesn't say. It says there were difficulties going into space. Did we go into space finally? If we went to Mars, I think we did, but if it doesn't tell, this is entertainment purposes. There were reflections, they were drawn choices, there was stress about doing it, there was chaos about doing it because people been hurting, killed, and there were missed opportunities on doing it, and it was waste of long time, and there was poor management. So it's not really telling me if it did. I'm going to do 2 more cards. It's saying that they had a lot of problems going into space, but they did go to Mars. So I would assume yes, but I'm going to try 2 more cards. They were security, family, traditions about it. They had security thing about it, so influence, tradition, and wealth and security. And they had greed about being into space and trying to go into space, so they were being greedy. So it's not really telling me that they went into space, went to the moon. Some of it said yes. Let me do 2 more cards. I don't know. I'll try one more clarity. They went to Mars, but did they really go to the moon? Some of it said yes, some of it said no. I'm going to do 3 more cards about this, and then we'll call it for that. They had some restraint about doing it, but there were new beginnings, so I assume, and it was like the chance, and they were cheating death. So they probably, I think they did do it. Eventually, they did do it, but they were cheating death because there were a lot of people before them almost died from doing this. So, and it was negative, and it was slow to change. So it took a while for them to do it. And they were unrealistic and lazy about doing it because they didn't know if anybody would get hurt. And they recovered from going into space, I feel like, and it was beginnings, a new beginning into space. So they did finally go into space. Phew, we found that. All right, so they went into space finally. And one more question. I'm trying to think of a good one. Is there anything else you need to tell me about them going into space? They went into Mars, and it took me a long time to tell that they. Tell me any more about anything more about them going into space. I'll do 3 cards. Please tell me. Because it took a long time, so we finally did go into space, but it took a long time because the money and dangerously. They were immature about going into space, about the money and the time, and it was a burden because a lot of people got burned out. It took a long time to go into space, and they were procrastinating. They were taking, like I said, they took a long time to go in space. So they didn't go when Neil Armstrong went. It was longer than that. And they were stressed out about it because they had a timeline because they were in the space war with the other countries, and they felt stressed out, and they were not very reliable because they weren't telling the truth. And there were delays about it. There were delays about going to the space program. They were taking their time. were taking their time. It wasn't going. They weren't going fast enough, and they were fear of sacrificing people's lives and the money, because it cost a lot of money every time there was something wrong with their, the space, the shuttles, because when they flew, just got destroyed in air or flight or something, it cost a lot of money, millions of dollars. So the fear of sacrificing money and people's lives, and there was a lot of chaos. And two, Ace of Swords. There was a lot of chaos when they started doing the space program, because they were afraid of losing people's lives and the money and this, like, other things, and they thought of new ideas of maybe how to raise money for the space program. All right, I'm going to ask one question. Because in the future I'm going to do about the Challenger. I'm going to do one thing about the Space Challenger. Did they knew there were problems before the Space Challenger took off? I'm going to do a thing on just the Space Challenger in the future, but I'm just going to ask one quick question. Did they know there was hidden problems on the Space Challenger and they went anyway about it? Please tell me. Did they know there were problems in the Space Challenge before it took off, or did they just know once they got the box that they find after plane crashes or helicopters or different? Please let me know about the Space Challenger. Did they know that there was danger before they put them up? And no, they didn't know anything. There was greed, though. They wanted to have the first teacher to be up there in space. They wanted, they wanted press. They wanted to make, she would be there. She would have her her students look down on her, and she would talk to them. So they're greedy, and they didn't want to give up the control of being the first woman in space, and she could talk to her students and learn things up in space. And they thought it was being generous by teaching kids about space. And this was progress. They thought it was progress having the teacher in space, and they didn't think there was any problems with the space shuttle. They thought it was going to be a victory. It was going to turn out right, and it wasn't going to have any problems. They thought they were trying to be positive. They had no idea that there were going to be problems. And this is the Seven of Cups in reverse. They were distractions. They were being distracted. I think they were being too distracted about her being famous and having a teacher and stuff, and having her be the first woman teacher to be in space. So maybe they were distracted on that. That's how I feel. And they were overwhelmed with the choices on who would be coming into space, because they had alternates. Like, if she couldn't make it, there would be another woman. So they were other alternate people. So she was overwhelmed, but they had overwhelmed by choices on what teacher was going to be in space. So yeah, they did not go into space first. The United States didn't. It was another country that was in space. Sorry if this was a long video, but I wanted to know, yeah, in the Challenger, they didn't know there was problems, and that they were oversighted by having a first woman teacher. So hopefully you like this video. Till my next video on tarot reading or other subjects, take care and bye.